This morning I want to talk a little bit about on the subject of the scapegoat. And let me give a little background to this. There, I think most of us are aware of what I mean when I say the scapegoat. We're going to take a quick look in a short while at where the word comes from and where in the Bible we can actually find the term. But the scapegoat has always been a subject of controversy, especially for those who belong to a Seventh-day Adventist background. You know that Adventists believe, and they are probably among the few people in the world who hold to this belief, they believe that the scapegoat represents Satan. Almost universally, everybody else in the Christian world believes that the scapegoat represents Jesus. And I think the very name that has been given to it, the scapegoat, suggests that it refers to Jesus. A scapegoat is defined as somebody who is blamed for something he didn't do. You put the blame on somebody, but he's not really blamable, but he takes the rap, as it were. And so to refer to this goat as a scapegoat suggests that he's taking the blame. He represents somebody taking the blame for what he really isn't responsible for. So the Christian world on the whole is very, very opposed to the idea that Seventh-day Adventists embrace, that the scapegoat is Satan. They believe the scapegoat represents Jesus. Now I'm going to just look at the service in just a moment, and we will see what the scapegoat, why these conclusions are arrived at. Now, I find myself many times in a conflicting position, because we all here, and maybe I am one of the chief culprits, we all are people who are very critical of the ways of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. Absolutely, and I have no apologies for that. But at the same time, every now and then I get into a little deeper study into certain subjects, and I find that I have to agree with the position of the Advent movement. I have to agree with it. And it's not because I am from an Adventist background, it's because when I go to the Bible and I begin to understand the plan of salvation, I find that there is a foundational truth in Adventism. This is one of the reasons I have a friend who says he has thrown out the baby and the bath water and the bath soap and everything. But I'm not throwing out the baby with the bath water. Where I find problems with Adventism, with the Adventist denomination and their interpretations, I will be foremost in speaking about it. But I also will not reject the reality that God started the Advent movement. There is a lot of truth inherent in what they taught, especially at the beginning. The thing is that the real problem is that they have concluded that they were infallible. That's the real problem. And even today, those people who belong to the One God movement, they have kind of assumed that the early Adventists were infallible, and that the only problem is with the modern Adventists. So they like to call themselves historic Adventists, with the idea that the historic teachings were infallible. Everything is perfect. And I absolutely reject that notion completely, categorically. It is absolutely not true. And this is what has led to a lot of the perverted doctrines that are cropping up among people from an Adventist background. But I do say that on certain critical teachings, I find that the Adventist basic foundation is amazingly correct. And when I could mention a few things, like, for example, the end time day of atonement. Anybody who studies the Bible with an unbiased mind can see clearly that the biblical teaching is that the day of atonement takes place at the end of time. You can't be an honest Bible student and conclude otherwise. And it's amazing to me that the only place you can find this teaching is in the Advent movement. There is also very clearly a pre-Advent judgment. There's a judgment that takes place before Jesus comes again. Adventists label it as an investigative judgment, and their understanding of it makes it a fearful thing for God's people. So the way they interpret it is wrong, but the concept itself is correct, biblically correct. You go to Daniel 7, you go to Revelation 4, and it's very clearly outlined there. So I can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And when I go to look at the subject of the scapegoat, I try to be honest with myself. I do try. All right. I don't want to be biased. I don't want to be blockheaded or bullheaded. I don't want to stick with tradition. I want to see what the Bible says. And when I look at the Bible, again, I am compelled to acknowledge that, biblically speaking, when you understand the plan of salvation, the scapegoat does not represent Christ. It represents Satan. Now let me go to let me bring up my Bible, and we will look at the passage in Leviticus that actually speaks about the scapegoat, and we will see what it says here before we proceed any further with our study. Give me a second to get out of this thing as always. All right, good. So the passage in question is Leviticus chapter 16, and I'm going to read from verses 7 to 10. Now, we understand, or I think most of us understand, that this is a part of the service of the Day of Atonement. And as I just pointed out, the Day of Atonement is an end time event. Now, here's a part of what was to take place on that day. I'm absolutely not going through the whole service because it would take us more than an hour to really do that, but I'm just looking at the scapegoat. Here's what it says in verses 7 to 10. And he, that is the priest, the high priest, he shall take the two goats, there are two of them, and present them before the Lord, before Yahweh, at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. So take the goats, bring them to the door of the tabernacle, and present them to the Lord. And Aaron shall cast lots upon the two goats, one lot for the Lord, and the other lot for the scapegoat. Two goats, flip a coin or pull straws, something, and one of them is chosen as the goat of the Lord, and the other one is chosen for the scapegoat. Now, the word here in the Hebrew that is translated scapegoat is the word Azazel or Azazel, depending on how you pronounce it. A-Z-A-Z-E-L. Azazel. Now, it has been translated as scapegoat because of the understanding of the translators, but the Hebrew word is Azazel or Azazel, whichever you prefer. And Aaron shall bring the goat upon which the Lord's lot fell and offer him for a sin offering. There's no question that this goat is representing Jesus Christ. It says, but the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat, or to be Azazel, shall be presented alive before the Lord to make an atonement with him and to let him go for a scapegoat into the wilderness. One of the challenges we have when we are studying the Bible is that some of the words that are translated a certain way, either they have changed their meaning over time, because you know the King James Version has a lot of archaic words, or some of them because theologians understand them a certain way. They use the word and it carries a certain meaning to the mind. For example, this word Azazel. I'm going to look at what it says about Azazel in the Easton's Bible Dictionary. In fact, maybe I'll just bring it up on the whole screen so that we all can read it together. I'll have to make it much bigger. And I don't know if you'll join me in reading it. But anyway, here we go. I could probably use a little my all right, let me use my highlighter. It says the word has given rise, that's the word Azazel. It has given rise to many different views. So there are a lot of different views about this word Azazel. So it's not like there's some standard meaning that we all can agree on. There are many different views. Some Jewish interpreters regard it as the name of a place 12 miles east of Jerusalem in the wilderness. Others take it to be the name of an evil spirit or even of Satan. All right, so some Jewish commentators really believe that this person is Satan. So it's not only Adventists who hold to this belief. Jewish commentators believe so, but of course, Jews on the whole, Jewish commentators are not really Christians. Now, here is the comment of this Christian man, this Christian commentator, Easton, who wrote this Bible dictionary. Here's what he says. But when we remember that the two goats together form a type of Christ, where did he get this from? That the two goats form a type of Christ. This is a belief that exists within Christendom, and it is assumed to be true. But when you look at the Bible itself, is this conclusion justified? They believe that the two goats together make up one symbol or one person, and that is Christ, on whom the Lord laid the iniquity of us all. And we examine into the root meaning of this word, that is to say, the word is separation. The root meaning of the word Azazel is separation. If you look at Strong's, you will see that it implies separation. The interpretation of those who regard the one goat as representing the atonement made, and the other goat, that for Azazel, as representing the effect of the great work of atonement, that is to say, the complete removal of sin, is certainly to be preferred. This is what Mr. Easton says. He says that the interpretation that says, okay, one goat represents the work of the atonement, that is, Christ paid a price for sin, and the other goat represents that Christ carried away sin. So he said it took two goats. He's saying that it took two goats to properly represent what Christ did. So one goat represents that he paid the price for sin, and the other goat represents that he carried the sin away. So he says this is the preferred interpretation, and that is his opinion, and that is the opinion of many different Christian interpreters. But I absolutely do not agree with them, and I'm going to explain why they have this faulty understanding. I will say straight up, and I will say plainly, that the reason is that they don't understand the plan of salvation. Oh, I still have the marks on the screen. Let me get rid of those. All right. So let me repeat that. The Christian world in general does not understand the plan of salvation. That I know this sounds like a very arrogant statement. You know, who am I? I mean, there have been hundreds of thousands of very spiritual, committed Christians over the ages, from the time of the Apostle Paul coming down through the ages, who have studied theology, who have studied the plan of salvation. And the present idea has become set in concrete, set in stone. All the Christian family hold to certain ideas that they regard as infallible, and they base everything upon those ideas. It's kind of like the doctrine of the Trinity. Leroy Froome referred to the Trinity as an eternal verity. You understand that verity means truth, okay? So if something is an eternal verity, it is a truth that is unimpeachable. There's no question about it. It doesn't come into the discussion. And that is why Christendom in general has labeled those who believe that there is not a Trinity, they have labeled them as a cult. They claim that they are not really Christians because they have equated the Christian faith to the belief in the Trinity. And you and I know that this is one of the great perversions deeply rooted, long established in Christendom, that is a falsehood and that dishonors God and that makes a mockery of the plan of salvation. You and I know. And the reason why I'm making this statement is because I want to make the point that just because something is widely accepted and just because everybody thinks it is true does not mean it is true. As a matter of fact, I dare to say that this concept of the scapegoat being Jesus is somewhat connected to the Trinity doctrine. It's not directly, but indirectly, you find that they both are related. Many of the errors that exist in Christendom, you find that if you trace them back far enough, you find that they are connected to the error of a Trinity, of God being a Trinity. So the whole point, the whole reason why the scapegoat is misunderstood is because the plan of salvation is not understood. It's not properly understood. Some days ago, well, I'll get to that in a moment, but I'm going to just present one or two clear objections, just some simple objections to the idea that Jesus is a scapegoat. Just a few objections, but I'll come to some stronger ones in a moment. Now, first of all, who was it that officiated on the Day of Atonement? Just think about this. Who officiated on the Day of Atonement? It was the high priest. And who is the high priest? The high priest in Christianity is Jesus Christ. He is our high priest. Now, the high priest confessed the sins of the people upon the head of the scapegoat. At the end of the Day of Atonement, notice when it took place. It happened at the end of the Day of Atonement. And we have studied this before, and all of us are aware that the Day of Atonement is something that takes place at the end of time. It is at the end of time that the sins are confessed on the head of the scapegoat. The scapegoat is led away by a strong man into the wilderness, and he's released there. He's never to return to the camp of Israel. Now, to say that this goat represents Jesus Christ, you have to take the Day of Atonement and put it 2,000 years in the past. And you have to say that 2,000 years ago, Jesus, who was not the high priest, he was not a high priest while he was on earth. The book of Hebrews tells us clearly that if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, because the priest, while he was on earth, the priesthood was the Aaronic priesthood. The Levitical priesthood and the Aaronic priesthood was the high priest class. Jesus was not a priest while he was on earth. It was when he went back to heaven that he became our high priest. So the Day of Atonement did not take place back there 2,000 years ago. We have looked at the feasts of Israel, and we realize that the Day of Atonement is an end time event. And it is at the end of the Day of Atonement that the sins are confessed on the head of the scapegoat. At this point, Jesus is high priest, but Jesus is not sacrificed, and Jesus is not scapegoat at the end of time. Who was it that officiated at Christ's death? It was wicked men, as I think one of the pioneers by the name of Crozier, I think it was Crozier who said, it was wicked men who officiated at the death of Christ. It was not Jesus who officiated as high priest at his own death. So just those points alone emphasize the fact that it is not correct to believe that this scapegoat is Jesus Christ. We're going to come to some much stronger evidence in a little while, though. But first of all, let me explain why there are two goats. Why are there two goats? Now, I'm going to bring up some images in a little while, but for the moment, let me continue to just use my voice, and I hope we can visualize what I'm trying to say. There were two goats. Now, some people ask the question, why two goats? Why don't we have a lamb and also a goat? Because obviously both symbols are similar. If we had two lambs, it would be easy to say that these two lambs represent Jesus Christ, because Jesus is clearly the lamb. But instead you have two goats, and everybody knows a goat has been used universally, and I believe even in Bible times, a goat has been used to be a symbol of the devil. Or to be more accurate, a goat has been used as a symbol of sin. So why do we have two goats on the Day of Atonement? And I will explain why. At least the Bible explains why. If you look at Galatians 5 and verse 21, look at this verse. Galatians 5 and verse 21. For he hath made him to be sin for us. What happened to Jesus? He was made to be sin for us, who knew no sin. The rest of the verse says that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. But I'm concerned about the first part. This is why Jesus is represented as a goat, for he hath made him to be sin for us. It's the same principle why Moses made a serpent and set it up in the wilderness. There's no question that the serpent is a symbol of Satan. But more than a symbol of Satan, it is more accurately a symbol of pure sin. Jesus was made to be sin. Like the serpent represented sin, so the goat represents sin. Jesus was made to be sin for us. What this means, and somebody asked me this question just this morning, what this means is not that Jesus became a transgressor of the law. It doesn't mean that Jesus broke the law. It doesn't mean that Jesus rebelled against God. It does not mean that God in some way piled up every transgression that took place for thousands of years and piled them upon the head of his son. No. It means that the fundamental principle of sin was placed upon Jesus Christ. And what is that principle? This is one of the verses that proves beyond any question, any reasonable question, that sin is not simply transgression of the law. What was put on Jesus was separation from God. That is what was put upon Jesus. That is why he died so quickly. That is what contributed to his death. He was separated from God, and this is a foundation principle of sin. It is when we understand sin in this way that we begin to be able to relate to it properly. So Jesus was made to be sin because he was separated from God. And again, you know, there are some people who say that God never had anything to do with the death of his son. That is not true. God laid sin upon Jesus. That's what the Bible says in Isaiah chapter 53. We could look at that very quickly also. It says, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And it says, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. God placed it on his son. It was necessary to the plan of salvation that God put our sin upon Jesus. And that sin was the state of separation from God. That is how Jesus was made to be sin for us. Also, in Galatians 3 and verse 13, it says something similar. It says, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. That is what God did to his son. He placed the curse upon him, and the curse is separation from God. So this is why on this Day of Atonement, we have the symbolism of two goats. As I said, a goat is a symbol of sin. And so on this day, Christ was represented as the one who bore the curse of sin. But also there is another goat who ultimately bears the blame for sin. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. But that explains the reason why we have two goats. This is why Jesus is represented as a goat. The spotless Lamb of God is represented as a goat because on the day when he was crucified, he was both the spotless Lamb of God and he was also the sin-bearing goat. He also took upon him the curse of sin, even though in his character he was spotless. Even though as far as blame is concerned, he was spotless, yet he bore the consequences of sin to the fullest extent, and so he's represented as a goat. Now, let me move on to another point. The cause of the problem, the root of the problem, is the idea that Jesus paid a price for sin. All right? The foundational wrong concept is that when Jesus died, it was to pay a price for sin. As a matter of fact, I don't know. I should really have my images on the screen that we can look at, because it might help to understand better. But let me see if I can do it using my voice. All right, and whatever else I have to use to help. Um, as a matter of fact, let me just go back to from my screen where you can see a little better. Now, the popular idea about the atonement, about what happened when Jesus died, is that there is a balance that needs to be maintained. I think I have a picture that illustrates it. Let me go to my picture, and I'll use my picture instead. Give me a second. I'm coming in just a moment. All right, let me see. All right. The popular idea is that there are two things that always need to be balanced. One of them is the law is the great principle that is at the center of everything that happens in the universe. The thing that makes us remain acceptable to God is perfect behavior. All right, this is the idea that is, let me say, universally believed. Okay, the whole issue revolves around balancing the law. So Christendom in general believes that, I mean, even those who are not Adventists, I'm not talking about Adventists here, I'm talking about Christendom in general. They believe that the law was broken, and because the law was broken, well, let me put the law back there. Because man's behavior was imperfect, we broke the law. Because of this, the scales became unbalanced. All right. So the law requires something to balance it, and what it requires is perfect behavior. And so, in order, first of all, the broken law has to be compensated for. Somebody has to die. Somebody has to die. The books have to be balanced. You know, like when you do accounts, you have to make sure that everything is balanced. You have one column that talks about expenditure. The other column gives you the income. And so the income and the expenditure must be balanced. And if it's not balanced, then you have to find a way to reconcile it. And so it is believed that the only way to balance for the broken law is that there has to be perfect behavior. First of all, you pay for the broken law. First of all, because there was imperfect behavior, there is an imbalance, and in order to fix it, somebody has to die. The person who broke the law has to die. So Jesus had to die. He had to be substituted for us because the law requires death. And secondly, he had to provide perfect behavior to balance the scales again. This is kind of like, generally speaking, this is the concept of what the atonement is about, you know. So since I have these images, let me use them. On the Day of Atonement, they got these two goats, and here you see the high priest confessing the sins on the head of the scapegoat, Azazel. And here you have a fit man, a strong man, carrying away this goat and releasing him in the wilderness where he never comes back to the people. What they say is that this goat represents sins. And so the sins are carried away into the wilderness by Jesus, and they are never to return to the people. If you look at it carefully, you can see quite a number of issues. For example, the goat is not a thing, the goat is a person. The goat is a being, just like the one that was killed was a being. So if the goat is released in the wilderness and he never returns to Israel, you would have to say that whoever this goat represents is separated from Israel forever. That would mean Jesus is separated from us forever. If you are consistent in how you interpret the symbols. Now I'm going to look at two sides of this chart, and on the left-hand side, I'm going to represent what I consider to be misconceptions. And on the right side, I'm going to put what I consider to be the truth, to help us to understand why this false idea exists. So first of all, it is popularly believed that the problem is a broken law. Man broke the law, as I just pointed out. Man broke the law, and because he broke the law, there is a penalty. Make a note of the word penalty. What is a penalty? A penalty is a sentence that is imposed upon you by the governor, by the king, by the ruler, because you have broken the rule and you must be punished. A penalty is a punishment imposed by the ruling authority. So Christendom believes that what happened is that we broke the law and God says, I have to punish you. And the punishment is death. What is the truth? That was not the problem. The problem was not a broken law. I have to highlight this because it's so important. The problem is not a broken law. The problem is not that the law is so amazing that it has to be defended and that if you break it, heaven and earth must be moved to fix the law. The problem is not the law. The problem is the relationship. The problem is the broken relationship. Now, I'm making this point because I want us to understand, yes, the relationship was broken based on the fact that they broke the law that God gave in the garden. God gave a law and they broke the law. All right, but people misunderstand this because they make out that the problem then was the law. No, the problem was the relationship, and the law was only put in place to test the relationship. Let's remember that the law was only put in place to test the relationship. And I like to say, because it is true, that if God had put a stone and said, "Don't touch the stone," would it have made a difference? Was it about the fruit, or was it about the test of the relationship, the test of their faith, the test of their trust in God? It was about the relationship. It was not about the law. The law itself was it was a law that God made up. God said, "Don't eat the fruit." God never gave that law to any one of us. That was given specifically to Adam and Eve. Don't eat the fruit. And I'm one of those who believe there was nothing wrong with the fruit. It just became a way of proving their relationship. And when the relationship was broken, this is what needed to be fixed. The misconception. Now, I'm going to say something that may be new to most of us, but I'm going to say it because I believe this is reality. Under the false ideas, man is blamed for breaking the law. And you will say, was not man to be blamed? Well, let's look at the other side of it. In reality, the truth is that man was the victim. Man is not the one who is blamable. Man is the victim. This gives us a different perspective of what happened. Most people come before God under a sense of guilt, under a sense of condemnation, and they feel that they are to be blamed. And so they are constantly, what's the word? They are constantly insecure. Constantly insecure. They have a persecution complex. They're afraid of God. They constantly condemn themselves because they feel that this is what God does. This is the perspective that is imposed on us by popular Christianity. Man broke the law. Man is to be blamed. Look at the other side of it. Man is the victim. I value that so much because I am one of those who condemned myself over and over and over. I did not understand. Then, when I came to understand the truth about the two Adams, it broke upon my darkened mind. I did not choose to be born in this world. How many times I even said it? I even said it to my parents. I didn't ask to be born. Sometimes when I had a little problem with them, but I said it to God too. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask to be put here. Now I'm facing eternal death. Now I'm facing punishment, and I didn't ask to be born. Better if I wasn't born. I was a victim. All of us were victims. We didn't ask to be born. We didn't ask to be born in a sinful world. Our foreparent Adam put us in this position. We are victims, brothers and sisters. Before we were born, we had the problem. So how do you blame me for it? This is why I know that my God understands and my God sympathizes with me. This is why I am so thankful. I am so joyful for the way the Lord has helped me to understand the truth, because now I'm no longer condemned. Now my God is working to help me to become what he wants me to be. And he doesn't condemn me, and he's not out to get me. He knows I'm a victim, and he's working with me to lift me out of that place. This is the good news. On the left-hand side again, people believe that the issue is that the scales must be balanced, as we saw, all right? They believe that in the universe there is a balance between the law and works. And you can't, if your works are not perfect, you unbalance the scales, and God has to find a way to balance those scales, because again, the law is at the center of this paradigm. The reality is that what really needs to happen is not that scales need to be balanced, it's that a relationship needs to be restored. If you want to call that balancing an equation, fine. But when you have a problem with somebody, when something gets in the way and breaks your relationship with a person, the great need is to find a way to restore that relationship. Now the legalist says the way to restore the relationship, let me give you a practical example. If you do something to offend somebody, what do they say you need to do? You need to go and apologize, right? And also they will add that you must make restitution. Okay? If you my crazy brother, the one who is not a Christian. Recently I heard something about him. He got into a fight with somebody and threw a stone. I don't even know if it is true, because sometimes he fabricates things. But anyway, supposedly he threw a stone and he hit a car that was passing and knocked out the light. So, according to the story, the people who were driving the car were some bad men. And they held on to him, and they said that either he was going to find the money to replace the car light, or they were carrying him off to some place or the other where he was not likely to be seen again. In some places and with some people, you don't take threats like that lightly. So anyway, one of my brothers forked up the money and paid over for him, right? And so at this point, parity is restored. Now, the balance is restored, because now the price is paid, and so he can be released. It's something like this that people believe happened with the plan of salvation. Somebody needed to pay a price because somebody demanded, you did something wrong and I need my pound of flesh. I need balance. I need my money. And they believe that the person who made this requirement was God. God says, you broke my law and it needs to be paid for. And if it is not paid for, you have to pay the price. This is a popular concept of the plan of salvation. God is the one who says, I need something, I need blood, and if I don't have this blood, you can't be forgiven. And of course, they say it's not really God, it's the law. They say the law demanded restitution or whatever it is. Something had to be paid. Now, you know that when it comes to relationships, it's not like this. In relationships, I say something to offend my wife, or I do something that hurts my wife. Because we love each other, she does not demand that I repair the damage. It is enough for her most of the time if I simply say, I'm sorry. It's enough. Why? Because the broken, the basis of the broken relationship is taken away. What happens is that you lose trust in one another. You lose harmony with one another, and you need to restore this. It's not that you need to pay a price. Like somebody says, I demand that you give me back what I lost. No, you don't do this in relationships that are based on love. The next thing that is misunderstood is that, well, I think I touched on this. They believe that a price was legally required. It has to do with legalism. On the other side, what we understand is what was needed was a champion was needed. Why do I say this? Because what we needed was not somebody who would pay the price. What we needed was somebody who would stand in our place, who would take Adam's place and fight the fight that Adam lost and win the fight. You know, like there's a bad man in the ring and he's beating everybody. And he has beaten my brother. He has beaten my brother. And the penalty is that, or the consequence is that my whole family has to serve this bad man. Okay? There's a little law here that if he can beat my representative, the whole family has to become his servants. So he beats up one of the brothers. What I need is a champion in my family. But I have a brother who possesses the qualities to take on this bad man and to beat him. And so he comes to stand on behalf of the family and he beats this bad man. And so he restores the family. It's something like this. What we needed was a champion, not somebody to pay a price. So the belief here is that death balances the scales. This is the misconception. But the reality is that when my champion fights this bad man, one of the things that is going to happen as a consequence of this battle is that he's going to die. He's going to win the battle, but in the process of winning the battle, he's going to get stung and the sting is going to kill him. But he will win the battle in the process of dying. It's like bees. You know, bees come out and they fight against whatever is attacking the hive. And in the process, the bee will die. When it stings you, it dies. But if you're a normal person, when a bee stings you, you run away from the hive or you run away from the area. So they win the battle, but in the winning the battle, they die. It's something like that with Jesus. Jesus didn't die to balance the scales. He didn't die to pay a price. He didn't die to satisfy a broken law. He died because in fighting the battle, a part of that battle involved the fact that he would lose his life. Why? Because he had to be separated from God. That was the condition of the battle. He had to be separated from God. And when you are separated from God, you die. It was a consequence, not a penalty, why he had to die. According to the misconception, it is justice or it is God who requires this. But the reality is that nature, it's because of the way nature is designed why Jesus had to die. And if I may reinforce what I said, if I may just repeat this. If you are separated from God, does somebody have to kill you? If you are separated from God, is it because, do you die because you are paying a penalty? No, it's a consequence. Any one of us who is separated from God will die. We may not die instantly, but we are going to die, and we're going to die quickly. Nobody can be completely separated from God and continue to live. In a very short time, you will be dead, because God is a sustainer not only of spiritual but physical life. When you choose, this is why there's a verse in Proverbs that says, "All they that hate me love death." It's speaking about wisdom, but again, we know that Jesus Christ is the wisdom of God. All they that hate me love death, because death is the consequence of separation from God. So if you look at the left-hand side of the column, you will see that we are taking a course that is strictly focused on legal balancing of the books. It's legal issues. It's a judicial system that is being supported here. And this is why Jesus had to die. But if you look at the other side, you will see that it is the natural results, the natural consequences of how sin operates. So, according to the misconception, Jesus took the blame. But if you look at the correct idea, Jesus took the consequences, not the blame. God did not give Jesus the blame. God didn't blame Jesus for the sins that we committed or that Adam committed. But even though man was not blamed, man was a victim. Man was a victim. And the victim had to be separated from God, and the victim had to die because of this separation. And that is what Jesus took. He took the consequences. He never took blame, because if he took the blame, it means that we were to be blamed. We are not to be blamed, and that is why God does not hold sin against us. And God made a way for us to escape the bondage of sin, because we are not to be blamed. We are victims. I know people don't like to hear this. Some people don't like to hear this because it is convenient and it gives us some kind of perverse satisfaction to blame people for the wrong they do. I mean, in a sense, you can say, look, you need to make different choices. But if you want to look at ultimate blame, look at how a person was born. Because we are the products of our birth, our environment, our socialization. We are products. Most of you have heard the argument about people who grew up in the ghetto versus people who grew up uptown. You've heard the arguments about the imbalance between different races in different countries, maybe in America. You've heard that certain people have certain advantages and certain people don't. And most of us can understand that there is really something behind this. You raise a person in deprived circumstances, and he's more likely to become a criminal. He's more likely to become a beggar. He's more likely to become unconscionable in certain things. Sometimes the people we blame, they are victims. And that is what God knows. God is not an unfair king. He knows why we are the way we are, and he made a way for us to escape it. He didn't look at what Jesus says. God sent not his son into the world to do what? To condemn the world. God sent not his son into the world to condemn the world. You condemn people who are blamable, who are to be blamed, but God sent his son to be a champion to deliver us from these circumstances. So Jesus took the consequences upon himself, not the blame. Over on the left, they believe Jesus paid for sins. If he paid for sins, who did he pay the price? Who did he pay? Who collected the money? Who collected the blood? Who collected the required fee? Who was it? He didn't pay for sins. What he did was he defeated sin. That's what he had to do, not pay for sin. He defeated sin. So this misconception, this pattern of misconception is why people believe that the scapegoat represented Jesus. But look at this, brothers and sisters. Ultimately, what does this symbolize? The high priest confesses the sins of the people upon the head of the goat. Remember the question that we looked at a little earlier on. Point number 2. Who was to be blamed for sin? Who was to be blamed for sin? This is the point. If you think that Jesus died to pay a price for sin, he paid for sin, then the scapegoat could never be Satan. If you think the issue is paying for sin, Satan cannot pay a price for sin. Who does he pay the price to? Where does he get it from to pay for sin? He has nothing to pay. But if you think of the question, who is to be blamed for sin? Who is to be blamed? Was Jesus to be blamed for sin? The answer is obvious. Jesus was not blamed for sin. The person who is ultimately to be blamed for sin is Satan, not to pay a price for sin, but who is ultimately to be blamed for sin. When the controversy is over, when all the dust is settled, when all the facts are in and the judgment is over, who is to be blamed for sin? God's people are delivered from sin. Jesus has overcome sin. Who is responsible for the problem of sin? This is what the Bible is showing us. The high priest, Jesus Christ, places the sins upon the head of the scapegoat, acknowledges that this goat is the one who is responsible. It's not the scapegoat, it's Azazel. A scapegoat is one who is not blamable, not responsible, but he takes the rap. Not true with Satan. Satan is responsible. He's the one to be blamed. Even Adam and Eve were victims. Somebody will say, well, Adam and Eve were told that they shouldn't eat the fruit. Fair enough. But remember this, you and I are aware, we are fully aware of the lies that Satan tells. We are fully aware of the consequences of sin. Yet sometimes we still disobey. Adam and Eve, who never knew any of this, they only heard the word, you will die. They had never been exposed to deception. They had never heard Satan's lies. They never knew what a lie was. They heard this being, saw him eating the fruit probably, telling them that they could eat the fruit and live. The conflict that came in their mind, if we say they were not responsible, we might be wrong. But if we say they were to be blamed, I would say, okay, if we say they were to be blamed for the mistake they made, maybe we could stretch a point, but I would say that I could still understand. I could still sympathize with Adam and Eve. And I will tell you this. This is why I believe that Adam and Eve will be saved. This is why I believe. I believe they made a mistake, a terrible mistake, a mistake that put all the world and all their progeny into the greatest and most awful, terrible situation the universe has ever seen. They are responsible. But I think there is enough evidence to say that they were deceived. They were deceived. They were taken off guard. And this is one of the reasons why God can save them and save their children. If they had sinned like Satan had sinned, deliberately, barefacedly, in the face of the greatest evidence, there could be no salvation for them. But they were deceived. And in a sense, you could say they were not blamable. It's frustrating when somebody is deceived. It's frustrating when sensible people allow themselves to be led astray. You see it in theology, when you see people believing in the Trinity. When you see people coming up with the idea that it's not Christ who lives with us, it is the words. You're frustrated. When you find your own people who should know better getting off into tangents when they should be more solidly founded on the word of God, it distresses you a bit. But because you understand the way of deception and because you understand the weakness of the human mind, sometimes you understand and you pray for them and you bear with them even in their folly. Our Father understands far better than we do. And our Father forgives. That is why he forgives and he bears with us long. And he works hard to get us out of the foolishness because he understands that in a sense, we all are victims. So the scapegoat represents the fact that at the end of time, the judgment determines that the one who is really responsible for all the evil on this planet, the one who is really to blame, is Satan. Now, let me go quickly to my Bible. Let me switch to my Bible and just point out something here. We have been going through the book of Revelation. We are going through it again. And most of us are familiar with certain things from the book of Revelation. But one of the things that we understand is that the book of Revelation is focusing on the judgment of the two kingdoms. All right, there are two great kingdoms in conflict. The kingdom of God, the kingdom of Christ, and the kingdom of Satan, the kingdom of the beast. The judgment that we see in Revelation, that we also see in Daniel 7, is the judgment of these two great kingdoms. And the judgment finally concludes in Revelation chapter 19. We have been through this before. I know I'm not saying something that is brand new to most of us. But when the judgment is over, this is the end of the Day of Atonement. If you look at the book of Revelation, it is full of the sanctuary symbolism. There is a censer. There is an altar. There's the Ark of the Covenant. There's a temple in heaven. It's full of the language of the sanctuary. There's the candlestick with 7 branches. Why does God put the book of Revelation in the framework of the sanctuary? The last service in the sanctuary in the Jewish economy, the last service in the sanctuary was the Day of Atonement. Just before the Feast of Tabernacles, which represented the harvest, God's people being harvested and taken out of this world, just before the Feast of Tabernacles, there was the Day of Atonement. It's the last service in the sanctuary. That's why Revelation is full of the sanctuary. It's the last sanctuary service. Revelation is about the Day of Atonement. What happens at the end of Revelation, or near the end of Revelation? Look at what it says in chapter 20. After the beast is thrown into the lake of fire, and the false prophet is thrown into the lake of fire. Look at what it says next. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. This is the fulfillment of what we see in Leviticus 16. This is a scapegoat. This is Azazel being bound. An angel comes down from heaven, and he has the key of the bottomless pit, and he has a great chain in his hand. This angel binds Satan, and again, we don't believe that this is a physical chain, of course. He's chained by circumstances. He's chained and he's bound for 1,000 years. He is put in a place where he can never harass or tempt or trouble the people of God again forever. He's placed in a wilderness at the end of the Day of Atonement. This is what we see in the book of Revelation. It makes perfect sense, and it fits perfectly with what we see there in the book of Leviticus. So the Day of Atonement, the scapegoat, the issue of the scapegoat is really a revelation to us that at the end of the judgment, it is revealed that the person who is ultimately blamable for sin on this earth is not Adam, is not you, is not me, is not even Hitler, nor Joe Biden, nor Donald Trump, nor Putin. The person ultimately responsible is Satan, and the judgment proves it. That is why God's people who accept Jesus Christ will not die in the lake of fire. This is why Jesus could say, at the end, he will say to those who are lost, "Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire." What? Prepared for the devil. Prepared for the devil and his angels. The everlasting fire that burns people until they die everlastingly. The everlasting burning is not for human beings, because we are not to blame. It was prepared for the one who is to blame for sin, Satan and his angels. Unfortunately, people are going to end up there with Satan because they never accepted the salvation provided. Though we are not to be blamed, yet we suffer the consequences, and consequences will kill you. Consequences mean that you have the evil nature, and if you hang on to this, you will die with Satan and his angels. Even though you're not guilty, even though you're not to be blamed, even though Jesus took care of all the guilt that could possibly be there, and Jesus made a way for you to have a new nature, so you escape the consequences. If you will not accept the provision he has made for you because of your nature, like a poisonous snake let loose in a child's playpen, it has to die, because the nature is poisonous and dangerous, and so you will have to die with the devil and his angels, not because you are to be blamed, but because you are so corrupt that you're a danger to yourself and the universe. So when you understand this, brothers and sisters, it becomes plain. I started out by saying that I don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. I believe that in this also. on this foundation, the teaching of Adventism is correct. And I hope that all of us could understand what I've been trying to say this morning in sharing these thoughts. Yes, Brother Joel asked a question concerning the presentation I made on the scapegoat, and I'm going to read his question and then I'll respond. I think there are about 2 or 3 points that he made, so let me read the question. Maybe even better anyway, I'll just read the question rather than bringing up the screen. But he said, here is the key challenge I have over the scapegoat being Satan. The fact that both goats had to be blameless and without any blemish. How come Satan be blameless and without blemish? Secondly, the high priest could not tell beforehand which goat will be Azazel. He had to cast lots, meaning any of these 2 goats could be Azazel. Now, Azazel is also a goat for atonement, according to verse 10 of Leviticus 16. In my thinking, no devil can atone for our sins. All right, I'm going to respond to this first of all, based on my understanding. I accept that Brother Joel has made some good points, but let me see if I can respond to them. The thing is, when you look at any subject in particular, you look at all the arguments for and the arguments against, and then you have to come to a decision in your mind. Where is a stronger degree of evidence? And I know that when it comes to evidence, sometimes our minds operate differently. But I will say that for my examination and where the evidence lies, that's the basis on which I make my conclusion. Okay, that's the basis on which I make my presentation. Now, the first question, both goats had to be blameless without any blemish. How can Satan be blameless and without blemish? Here's what I would respond to that. A goat, by definition, is a symbol of sin. A goat is not a symbol of righteousness. It's not a symbol of a righteous person. By definition, a goat is a symbol of sin. And universally, a goat has become used as a symbol for Satan. So I would say the default position, if you look at the symbolism, the default position would be that both goats incline towards being Satan. However, one of them is going to be chosen for the Lord's goat. It is not known beforehand which one is to be chosen for the Lord's goat. So I think the specification about the goats being without blemish is necessary because nobody knows which of these is going to be chosen for the Lord. Jesus is going to be the goat without blemish, but also the goat that is sin. Made sin, yet having no blemish. So if you don't know which goat is going to be chosen, if you don't choose the goats beforehand, either you choose one of them that is very badly blemished, because if the goat is going to represent, I mean, as I said, the goat in itself doesn't need to be blemished. The very fact that it is a goat means that it is blemished through and through, because it's a symbol of Satan. So I don't think the fact that it says the goat should be without blemish is a major factor. Jesus was made to be sin, and when he was made to be sin, the real point about sin and righteousness is the state of separation from God. As we know, evil is not something that has substance in itself. It is simply the absence of good. You can't become more evil. You are evil. Either the absence of good makes you evil, and that evil begins to manifest itself. It's like cold. You don't become more cold, you become less hot. You don't become more evil, you become less good. So in relation to how much you are connected to the Lord, your goodness appears like light, like heat. But darkness and cold and evil are simply the absence of something. Anyway, I know we understand this. So what I'm saying is that when I look at the fact that it says both goats are to be without blemish, in my mind, it's not a major factor. It doesn't say that it means that they're a symbol of Christ, because a goat by definition is a symbol of the evil one. So that's the first point. I mean, that's the way my mind looks at this. it was not known beforehand which goat was to be Azazel, meaning that any of these two goats could be Azazel. And again, my thought on this is that when the Bible talks about Jesus' condition on the cross, it says that he was made to be sin. You cannot get worse than this. I think that if we say Satan, at one point my father and I had an argument, and he said that God doesn't love Satan because Satan is now sin. I didn't agree with him, because in my mind, even though Satan is now the embodiment of sin, he also was a son of God. He was a child of God. He was loved of God. And as long as that reality is there, God will always love him, even when he has to destroy him. But the point is, he was saying that Satan is now the embodiment of sin. And I ask, what was Jesus on the cross? If we measure sin by behavior, we say Jesus was infinitely better than Satan. But if we measure sin by relationship to God, which is what we have been saying, then there was no difference between Jesus on the cross and Satan at that moment in terms of relationship to God, because God treated Jesus in the same way that Satan is treated. So in terms of relationship, Jesus was fully a goat on the cross. So I think it depends on how we look at these statements. Lots are cast, and one is chosen for the Lord's good, one is chosen for Azazel. It means that in terms of the condition that they are in on that day, their condition is identical. The third point is Azazel is said to be a goat for the atonement. And this is a point. This is a good point. And here's what I will say. The word atonement, I've said this many times, and I think most of us agree that the word atonement, as it is understood in Christian theological thinking, I believe there's a flaw in how it is defined. The word atonement is used to refer to a saving substitute. Look at the places, look at the comments that are made and the places it is used in the Bible, and they understand it to mean a substitute that saves, an atoning sacrifice, a sacrifice that somehow replaces our sinfulness. This is the idea behind atonement. However, there is another aspect to atonement, and when the way we understand the plan of salvation, it's different. This is not exactly what atonement means. Atonement means God's way of making the wrong right. God's way of providing a way that he can save humanity safely. The word atonement is a word that is used in the Bible, and it is even mistranslated in some places. For example, in Romans 5, the word atonement is used where it really should be translated as reconciliation. Reconciliation is the idea of bringing back two parties together. Now the question is the condemnation of Satan a part of the process of restoring humanity to its rightful place with God? And I believe it is, because I don't think the question of our acceptance is settled until blame is placed on the right person. It's not over till blame is properly apportioned. If you say that I'm to blame for my sin, and God finds a way to remove that blame, then who is to blame? How do you explain in the judgment? How do you settle before the universe that nobody is blamable for sin? Jesus didn't bear the blame for sin. He bore the consequences, which is a different thing, but somebody is to blame. How do you explain sin in a universe that was made perfect? A part of the whole process of at-one-ment, bringing everything back to God. As a matter of fact, I would say the ultimate question is, who is responsible? That's the ultimate question. You cannot justify God. You cannot free God of all blame. You cannot say God's people are not accountable until you settle that question. And in my understanding, when it says that the goat is to make an atonement, it is to settle the greatest question in the whole controversy. Who is responsible? And I really see that as a part of the whole atonement process. But if we look at the word atonement in terms of the limited understanding, then of course it doesn't make sense, because in Christian theology, as I said, atonement has been given a very limited and narrow meaning. So, and based on that narrow meaning, then it could never apply to Satan. But with a broader understanding, which I think most of us are appreciating, it does apply very well in my understanding. The other thing, the fact that the high priest is the one confessing the sins to Azazel, does not really make Azazel not Christ, as also the high priest is the one slaughtering the lamb. All right, okay, that's a very good point. Now, let me respond to that in a way though. On the Day of Atonement, let us say we accept that the Day of Atonement is an end time event. Christ did not die on the Day of Atonement. Christ died on the Passover. Based on the Jewish system, he died at the Passover 2,000 years ago. Now, every service that the Jews ever had, every service, a lamb or a goat or a dove or a calf or a bullock had to die. Every service. As a matter of fact, they had a sacrifice morning and evening. So the timing of the sacrifice is not a significant issue, because it happened every day at every service. It's not a Day of Atonement service per se. As a matter of fact, on the Day of Atonement, there were several sacrifices. And the reason is because God is really emphasizing the fact that nothing happens in the plan of salvation that the blood of Christ or the death of Christ or the sacrifice that Christ made is not a major factor in what is happening. Jesus didn't die, or he doesn't die on the Day of Atonement, but his blood and his sacrifice are the critical elements in the moment of the Day of Atonement. So the sacrifice of the animal, in my opinion, is not a major factor of the Day of Atonement. Because that happens every day, at every service. What is different is the placing of the sins upon the head of the scapegoat. Now, this doesn't happen any other time, no other service, no other time in the year. So the thing is that the Day of Atonement is a service that takes place sequentially. The timing of the Day of Atonement is important. Most Christians say the Day of Atonement took place when Jesus died. I absolutely do not believe that, and I think most of us don't believe that. We believe we had the Passover, then you had the unleavened bread, then you have the wave sheaf, then you had Pentecost 50 days later, and then down at the end of time you have blowing of trumpets, you have Day of Atonement, and you have tabernacles. We believe it is what they would call an eschatological event, an event based on time, and the timing of the Day of Atonement is the end of time. So the sins being placed on the scapegoat is an end time event. It didn't happen when Jesus died. It happened at the end of time. So you ask the question, are sins to be placed on Jesus at the end of time? That's a question. Did Jesus already deal with sin 2,000 years ago as far as he was concerned? Or are these sins to be placed on him at the end of time? Is he to be held accountable again at the end of time for the sins of all God's people? You see, it really depends on when do we say the Day of Atonement is. But if we accept that the Day of Atonement is an end time event, the scapegoat is strictly confined to the Day of Atonement service, then it has to be saying that at the end of time, in the Day of Atonement service, somebody is recognized as accountable for sin. Not to pay the penalty for sin, not to make reconciliation for sin, but something relating to sin is placed on this person, and he bears the consequences of it. So when I look at it from this perspective also, it further strengthens my thought that this really represents it. And the other question that brother Joel also brings up, he says also the fact that Azazel never returns from the wilderness is the same with the slaughtered lamb, as it also never resurrects from its death. All right, I know the lamb is never resurrected from its death, but as I said, the death of the lamb is a daily service in everything that happens. The resurrection is not typified in the daily death of the lamb, but it's typified at Pentecost and at the Passover, or I should say at the wave sheaf. On the third day after Christ died, the wave sheaf was offered, which represents the resurrection of Christ. So it's a very definite event that is there in the service. The wave sheaf is a resurrection of Christ when he was offered as the first fruits of the harvest of earth. So it's there in the Jewish festival service. Now, the last thing probably is the question of Azazel being released at the end of the 1,000 years. Now, it is true that Satan is bound for 1,000 years, and the scapegoat is never to be allowed to return to the camp of Israel. Why? How is it then that if Satan is taken away in the wilderness, how is it that he is to come back at the end of the 1,000 years? But here's the point. The scapegoat was absolutely, completely, totally, and finally removed. Where? From the camp of Israel. He's never again to return to Israel. Now, even though Satan comes back at the end of 1,000 years to face final judgment, he never again is allowed into Israel. He never again returns to Israel. His 1,000 years of banishment is a statement as to his accountability. Notice what it says. When we're taken out of this earth in Revelation 19, Jesus returns riding on the horse, and he puts the beast and the false prophet in the lake of fire. It doesn't end there. We're out of the world. So why doesn't it just leave the story? No, it doesn't leave the story. It tells you that what happens to Satan is a punishment. It's not the final judgment. It's not the destruction of Satan yet, but he is bound with a chain and is cast into the bottomless pit. Some sentence has taken place. Something has happened, and the Bible illustrates it by Satan being bound. When you bound a person and you throw him into a place, he is arrested. He's arrested because he's found to be guilty. He's guilty as charged, and he's arrested and locked up. That's the picture the Bible is giving us. So he's bound for 1,000 years, and he's chained that he cannot get away. So his reign of terror, his period of having an impact on Israel is finished forever. The next time he appears, it is not typified in the Jewish economy, because for God to represent this, you would have to have another festival after the Feast of Tabernacles, because the Feast of Tabernacles represents the millennium. So after the millennium, this is where it ends, with the Feast of Tabernacles. What happens beyond is not typified in the Jewish system at all. But it happens, and it's there in Revelation. So in Revelation, when he reappears at the end of the 1,000 years, it is not to harass Israel. It's not to come back into the camp of Israel. He has been banished to the wilderness, and that is his destiny forever. He has been found to be blamable, to be accountable, and he will never again. That is a final, irrevocable decision, and his destiny is sealed forever. So, Brother Joel, that is how I would respond to those points. And I understand that the questions are just thoughts that come to your head, and you may very well be right, and I may very well be wrong, but this is how my mind looks at those issues.
Brother David, thank you very much for your responses. I will prayerfully really have a look at this. And I'm trying to move away from the Adventist mentality that I grew up with, because I grew up with Azazel as Satan, and that's the only thing I knew. So when I read Leviticus 16 for the first time for myself, I saw the opposite. It's difficult for me to accept the fact that the goat represents Satan or is an evil animal, because it was one of the animals used. Remember, the bull was also used, the dove was also used, the lamb was also used, and all those animals that were used for sacrifice, all of them represented Christ. There's no sacrifice that was a sacrifice of the devil. So I cannot accept just because on the Day of Atonement, goats are used, and then we use the traditions of men, which are saying goat is an evil animal, because in some of the African cultures, the goat is a holy animal. When they sacrifice to their ancestors, to the people they respect, bringing them their spirits back, you can't use any other animal. You have to use a goat because it's the only animal that's holy. And some of the Western traditions, it is an evil animal. So it's very difficult to see it in that sense. But for me, when I realized that the sins are confessed to the goat, and that this goat is an atoning animal for atonement, and that this goat is blameless. One of the rabbis I spoke to in my area here, he said most of the time they would use twin goats because they must be exactly the same or from the same flock. So then to me, I realized that these are two sides of the same coin. I like the fact that when you open, you said you weighed evidence, and for you, the evidence is heavier on the side that the scapegoat is Satan. I'm sure you recognize I once sent you a quote from Ellen White where she was saying the scapegoat is Satan, and then 50 years later she changed and said, no, the scapegoat can't be Satan, it's Christ. So I was just laughing because I was studying the same thing, looking at it, trying to find out what Ellen White is saying. Then I quickly realized that I cannot really ask her for an opinion on this one. But yeah, but I'm very, very happy with the points that you have given me. They're gonna give me more pointers to study. When it comes to the Day of Atonement, I believe it's an end time event, as you are saying, but also my end time starts at the cross. It doesn't start after 1844, because for me, Paul, when he says in these last days, God speaks to us by his son, he means last days for real. So to me, starting from the cross right up to our time is the last days. So when I look at atonement, I I see a wider picture that starts from the cross right up to the last days. I still don't have it clear in my mind as to exactly which part of the Day of Atonement, because I cannot run away from the fact that there was a sacrifice. There was a life that was used to cleanse or to clean the sanctuary. There was blood, and I know that blood comes from the cross. So I cannot separate that and say because it happens every day, therefore I cannot count it when it comes to the last day events, because it means to me the blood of Christ is still effective from the cross. It's like a present continuous process, but I still don't have it clear in my mind exactly, because I believe the Day of Atonement is really a part of the closing scenes of this world's chapter. But where does it start? Where does it end? I'm really still not clear there. But thank you very much for the pointers. I've taken some notes. Thank you so much, David.
Okay, Brother Joel. And I see you, the other Brother Joel. Just to make a quick point, Brother Joel. It's interesting as you mentioned that the goat was a sacrifice. There was no blood shed by Azazel. There was no blood. It's a bloodless sacrifice, which is an interesting thing. That the second goat never died. He never made an atonement by dying. And there was something else you said that stirred up a little thought in my mind as well. Of course, when you talk about the end of time, I agree with you. In one sense, the end of time began from the time that Jesus came. But I know you agree, and what I was trying to say is that the festivals of Israel are a map. They are a roadmap of the plan of salvation. That's one of the great foundations on which we build. Our faith is built. And of course, we understand that the final event is the Feast of Tabernacles. And just before the Feast of Tabernacles, there are certain things that take place in the 7th month. God gave us this timetable with definite dates so that we could fix certain things clearly. And one of the things that we can see is that the Day of Atonement is an end time atonement. I think people sometimes don't make a difference between the atonement made on the cross as opposed to the Day of Atonement, the day of the final resolution of all the questions This for me is the Day of Atonement, when the questions are all answered. What happened on the cross was massive, but none of us believes it was the end. A lot of evangelicals believe it was ended at the cross. We don't believe this, with great justification. So, you know, we believe that there's an end time atonement. And likewise, a lot of the things that they believe, because of that misconception, we don't believe it, you know. So anyway, I just wanted to say that as a final thing, Brother Joel.